Welcome back, everyone. A while ago I did a version of the turd fly, and I explained to you a little bit about the evolution of the turd fly and the history and how it came about. And I want to demonstrate another version of the turd, which I quite like. It's a more realistic kind of fly, and it's just a different way of using foam. It's called the Man Turd, and the back end of the fly is pretty much the same as the previous one I tied. So you start by tying a little bit of thread at the back. You do this just to tie a bit of a tail in. In this case it's going to be synthetic fiber and not the rubber legs and stuff that we tied in the previous one. Now I always like to use a little bit of resin or something when I tie fibers. It just binds it a little bit better, and I will be doing the same in this fly. So you just add a little bit on that thread, a little bit of resin or glue or something, and you use any synthetic fiber. I'm tying it on the grip 21711 NSL, the size 2. The packet is here somewhere on that one. You can tie it smaller on the size 4 or the size 6 even. And you start by tying a clump of synthetic fiber in the back, short, very short. It can be EP fiber. There are many different fibers available on the market, and so it doesn't really matter what you use. You don't have to tie this kind of tail in. You can tie rubber legs in. There are many different styles that you can tie this in. Make a few wraps just to trap that properly, and fold that forward. You want to leave that hook bare because you're going to spin some deer hair on it. Fold that back nicely, and tie that down properly. Just like that, a very short tail. We're going to cut it even shorter a little bit later. And then you just secure that with a little bit more resin. Right there. So that's pretty much what that end looks like. Now the next step is to again tie a little bit of deer hair on. Cut this shorter, kind of the length you want it, before you start to tie the deer hair, otherwise you're going to cut the deer hair tips. It's a very short tail. Take your stacker, put some deer hair in there, get the ends together, and I've prepared this, and tie that just a little bit longer than the fiber tail. Tie that in right there. Make sure that spins around the hook. Now what I do at this point, before I pull that back, I cut that a little bit shorter, just to get those ends out of the way of the tips when you need to trim those tips. Just a rough cut. We're gonna do a better job a little bit later on. Just makes it a little bit easier when we go back to cut that. And you trap that with a few wraps of thread on the bare hook. Now if you want a very dense, densely tied body or deer hair, use a coarser deer hair, something like belly hair. You don't really get the belly hair in a natural color like this, but you get it in dyed colors, or but use a coarser hair if you don't want it to be too dense, and I don't want it to be too dense because we want this to suck up some water and sit just below the surface. Then we use a finer deer hair. I just want to grab my other deer hair that's here and get that out. and you use a finer deer hair that will suck up a little bit of water. So you take a piece of deer hair, you brush it out, brush all those fine, very fine hair. It's almost like a under fur. Brush that out, and then you can go ahead and cut that, and you don't even need to put it in a stacker. You just cut bundles of this. Get all the fine hair out, otherwise it prevents it from spinning properly. You don't need the tips on the next bunch of bunches that you're going to tie forward, so you can cut that off. It's easier to work with. And put that on top of the hook and spin that around. Now you can see it's much finer hair. It's not the coarser hair that I kind of like for dry flies, or when I pack deer hair and I want it to be very tight. For deer hair bugs. Not that I tie a lot of deer hair bugs. I'm not that fond of tying those sort of things. It's very hard work, and I prefer simple flies. And you just work your way forward, all the way to the front, and then we're going to trim it again. It's a very easy process. Cut the tips and put that on the hook. Now the you can also use a different material for this. What I have used in the past, I have used instead of deer hair, used a brush, like a brush that you make with EP fiber or something like that, and use that instead of deer hair. It is much quicker to tie it if you have the brushes. Obviously, if you don't, you still need to make the brushes, but it comes out very nice. You can just, when you make your own brushes, make sure you make the brushes quite dense, so they won't collapse, so the fibers won't collapse in the water. And you just tie the brush in and wrap it forward. So that's a very quick way of doing it once you've got the brushes. Obviously the brushes takes a bit of time if you still need to make the brushes, but you can tie more than one fly with one brush, which is very handy. And there's a huge variety of colors that you can use. Obviously the front of this fly, the front hook, is important because that is the hook that needs to make the fly float. So whatever happens on that hook is really important in this fly. You just keep going until you get to the front. Very simple. There's a huge shortage in deer hair at the moment after lockdown, predominantly because of, well, two reasons. One, because of a huge increase in demand for flies. On the commercial side, we've had a huge increase, unbelievable increase in demand for flies. And secondly, because of a very poor hunting season. So we're really struggling to get deer hair. If anybody out there knows of a good source for deer hair, please send me a message. And I think this will be the last bundle. And then you tie the fly off. Leave a good space in the front between the hook and the eye of the hook and the deer hair, so that you have enough space to tie it off and be able to finish it off nicely, and you don't want everything to be right on the eye of the hook. We'll finish that. That's it. And then you cut the thread, and now you just need to cut the deer hair. Now the deer hair, when you cut that, the important thing is the first place where you cut is the bottom. I'm just going to grab my hair scissors here. They are somewhere here. There we go. You cut the bottom, and you cut it parallel to the hook shank. And you want that to be open, you want that hook gate to be open. So you want to cut as much as possible away below the hook shank. When you look at it from, you can see the bottom that is cut open. When you look at it from the bottom, leave it in the vise, you make one cut from the eye of the hook away to the tips of the first bundle of deer hair that you tied in, and on both sides. And this is not the final cut, it's just to give you a basic shape of where you're going with the fly. And then you turn it upright and you make exactly the same from the eye of the hook backwards to the tips of the deer hair. So you've got that. It's pretty messy still. I normally take it out of the vise now. I'll try and keep my hands in front of the camera, and then turn it around, and I cut from behind, from the tips of the deer hair to the eye of the hook, on the sides and on top, and actually all the way around. So you get a kind of a round shape on the fly. Slightly tapered. I think it's a little bit wide at the back, so I'm going to cut it a little bit narrower. That's a nice thing. If you cut it a little bit wide, you can always go smaller, but if you go too small, you can't go wider or bigger. You can see the shape, and that's it. And now we're going to go to the hook in the front that we tie, and I'm going to show you how to attach this to the other hook and how to do the next hook. So let's change things quickly and then we carry on. So when we start with the second hook, or actually the hook in the front, we need to first tie in a piece of monofilament, or we need to attach the first hook that we tied with a piece of monofilament to the front hook. And what we do is you take a piece of, I use 20 pound. That's more than enough strength. So you thread it through the eye of the hook, and then you lay it down on top of the hook that you're going to be tying the front hook. Both hook points look down, and the eye of the back hook must be just above the bend of the front hook, and you keep that there. First, of all, you cover the hook shank with some thread, and just secure that with a few wraps of thread. And once you've done that, you just make sure all your proportions and the distance between the hooks and everything is right. You can at this point still slide it back and forth, and once you're happy with that, what I normally do again is to add a bit of a resin or a glue, just to bind that the thread and the monofilament and everything together. But before I do that, I slide the tips of the monofilament through the eye of the front hook, because we're going to be bending it around and tie it down at the bottom of the hook shank as well, just to prevent it from sliding out. So now you can see they are quite loose. Take your dubbing needle, take a bit of glue or resin and just work it in there, and you then wrap that tight with tight wraps forward. Then what you do at that point, you can add a bit of glue at the bottom as well. Pull the two pieces of monofilament backwards against the hook shank, and from the front with tight wraps tie that down against the hook shank at the bottom. And at this point you can cut them the right length, and you want to cut them sort of not too long. You want to cut it just short of the hook shank length. Make sure there's a bit of resin in there. You then trap that all the way backwards, and you can make that loop shorter or smaller by tying it all the way down the hook shank, not down the bend. So not down there. That's perfect there. Now you can just remove that excess resin. So the foam you're going to need are there are two components. One is I cut them in a coffin shaped kind of piece, and that's what will form the shell back. And then you're going to need, on a size 2 hook, I use 5 strips of lighter color foam. Now you can decide on the color combinations yourself, but it's about a 2 millimeter. It's 2 millimeter foam that I cut in 2 millimeter strips, and you're going to need about 5 of those. On the smaller hooks, you can go down to 4, and you can play around with the diameter or the thickness of the foam that or the width of the strips that you cut. You can play around. That will add a little bit to the shape of the profile of the fly. Now, first of all, you take that coffin-shaped piece of foam and you tie that on top of the hook and down to the front, and it will taper a little bit. And cut that end off. You need to leave enough space to tie the fly off, obviously. And you go back, and you can trap that properly. You can tie that down properly. Okay, so once you've tied your shell back foam in, you start with the foam strips. Now I thought I had enough tan strips, but I don't, or enough foam for tan strips, so I'm going to just do it with brown. And your strips needs to be about 5 centimeters when you tie it on a size 2 hook, because you need a bit of length to work with when you finish the Iron Man body. And you just tie those in. Sorry, tie that on the inside, not the outside of the hook, and just with the figure of 8 foam or figure of 8 thread wrap rather. Tie that in and perpendicular to the hook shank. And you tie all of them. I'll just turn the vise just now so you can see what I'm doing. You tie all of them right next to each other, against each other. Right there. And those of you who fish tarpon and tie tarpon toads will know exactly what I mean by this. Just tie them all nice and next to each other. Make sure they're as far back as possible, because you need a bit of space to finish this fly off in the front. So you need to cover about half the hook shank with the strips, and the other half you're going to cover with the other ends that you're going to fold over to finish the fly. So that's what you will have after you tied all the strips in. Now you can vary the color. I mean, there's so many opportunities, so many possibilities with this fly. You can tie a brown tan, or pink, or whatever you want to use in this fly. You can really vary the colors on this fly. What you do then is you turn the vise back this way, and you start by folding the strips from the back strip. You fold that forward over the hook shank. That's the way I like to tie it. Not too tight. And you trap that right against the hook shank right there. Just with 1 or 2 wraps. You come back with the other one over to this side, and you trap it right there. And then this side goes over again. And you alternate sides, or you rather, and then this side. Just make sure you tie them nice and tight right next to each other, and those ends point down. One over the other. Takes a bit of time, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually very easy. And then when you get to the last one, the last strip, from the side, you pull all those ends next to each other, you pull all of those in, and you tie that off on the side of the hook. So the last strip you tie in on the one on your side, you tie in on your side of the hook, and the one on the far side you tie in on the far side of the hook. You don't cross those over. That's the way I like to tie it. There are a few different ways that you can do this whole Iron Man effect. Like that. You've got all these ends sticking out here. We're going to cut those now, and we're going to fold that over, that shawl back over to the front, wrap that with a few wraps of thread, cut that off, that excess, so we want to create a nice head. Tie that foam in there nicely. Tie that off. Cut the thread, and then you turn the fly around, and those legs you cut just straight off, just flush with the rest of the foam. And that's the Iron Man turd. That's the effect that you get when you tie the foam strips in. There's the back end. And this is one of the more successful versions of the turd that they came up with, although they have now started tying the back hook with synthetic, also something that will absorb foam, or water at least, so it can be a little bit subsurface, but so they keep on changing this, and that's the evolution of this fly. Is just unbelievable if you look at where it comes from and where it is now and how successful it is. So go and try a few. Try them out. You can tie them on different size hooks. There is a very small one that I tied the other day. There's a size 6, much smaller, 2 size 6 hooks. And fish them, and yeah, leave your comments. If you have fished them before and you've got different ideas of tying them, please share them with us. And please like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, and thanks for watching.